Hey everyone! If you enjoyed this video, the full version is available on Patreon. I'll be uploading all my content there going forward. It's currently free, but in the future I'll add a small monthly fee to support the channel. Comment or message me what price feels fair for you. Let's make it comfortable for both sides.
Chapter 1. July 24, 1991. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in the Scottish Highlands. The atmosphere inside the tower of the Vice Principal's office was somewhat eerie. Professor Minerva McGonagall pushed up her square glasses, her brow furrowed, as she looked out the window at the chaotic owls. In previous years, by this time, these diligent messengers would have already been sending out acceptance letters to every corner of Britain. But today, they seemed to have encountered some natural enemy. They trembled and curled up into balls, refusing to fly out of the tower no matter what. Even when lured with food, they simply bury their heads in their wings and make frightened cooing sounds. This is truly a ghost story. Professor McGonagall waved her wand, trying to soothe the frightened little ones with magic, but to no avail. "Minerva, what happened?" Just then, a gentle but slightly aged voice rang out at the doorway. Albus Dumbledore wore a purple robe covered with star and moon patterns, held a handful of honey candies, and had a curious glint in his deep blue eyes. "Albus, you've come at the perfect time." Professor McGonagall sighed and pointed to the mess on the windowsill. "There seems to be a special case among this year's freshmen. All the owls refused to deliver this letter. Even the longhorn owl, which takes pride in this, is playing dead." Dumbledore blinked and popped a honey candy into his mouth. "Oh? That's unusual. Could it be because the address is written underwater? Or is it some kind of extreme magical magnetic field interference?" As he spoke, the old man walked forward with a smile. "Let me see which little wizard is so disliked by the owl." He stretched out his long, slender fingers and picked up the heavy parchment envelope from the top of the pile of letters that the owl had rejected. The envelope was cold to the touch. There was no special black magic curse. Dumbledore casually pushed up his half-moon spectacles, his gaze falling on the dark green address bar. The next second, the smile on the old man's face froze instantly. As if struck by a petrification spell, his face froze. The honey candy in his mouth crunched with a crunch as he accidentally bit it to pieces. Those eyes, which always shone with wisdom, suddenly contracted, as if they had seen the most terrifying thing in the world. On the envelope, written clearly in cursive script: "Neumont Tower, Austria, top floor prison cell. To Mr. Blake Grindelwald." Snap! The half-spoon of honey in Dumbledore's hand fell to the ground. Nurmengard. Grindelwald. These two words together were like a heavy hammer blow, slamming into the heart of the greatest white wizard of this century. PTSD. This is definitely PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Professor McGonagall was startled by Dumbledore's reaction. "Albus? What's wrong? Your hands are shaking." "And nothing, Minerva." Dumbledore took a deep breath, trying to maintain his authority as headmaster. But the slight trembling of his beard betrayed the turmoil in his heart at that moment. That name! Grindelwald. Gellert Grindelwald. The person he personally locked in the tower was also the only, the only person he could never let go of in his life. The first Dark Lord who almost ruled the entire magical world. "This is impossible." Dumbledore muttered to himself, his voice hoarse. "Gellert has no offspring, he shouldn't have any offspring. However, the Book of Admission and the Pen of Acceptance cannot be wrong." Although Professor McGonagall did not know what the surname Grindelwald meant to Dumbledore, she believed in Hogwarts contract magic. The names of any young wizard with magical talent will appear in the book. Dumbledore stared intently at the name. Blake Grindelwald. A long time. The old man closed his eyes, as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. He could sense it. Even if separated by thousands of miles, even if it's just a letter. The subtle yet powerful magical fluctuations emanating from the paper. That was the unique aura of arrogance and destruction that belonged to that family. Minerva. Dumbledore opened his eyes again, and the playfulness of the past was gone from his deep blue eyes, replaced by an unprecedented solemnity. The owl really can't deliver this letter. They are afraid. Fear of the king who once nearly set the world ablaze. Professor McGonagall gasped, "What do we do then?" Dumbledore was silent for a moment. He pulled an elder wand from his pocket, a trophy he had won from that man. The old man slightly turned his wrist, and a silver-white phoenix guardian spirit condensed at the tip of his wand. "I'll deliver it myself. Use my phoenix. Only in this way can we fly into that tower. Austria, deep in the Alps." The wind howled, and the black rocks appeared and disappeared in the snow. This is a forbidden area in the wizarding world. Nurmengard. Once built to imprison dissidents, the prison has now become the final resting place of its builders. The very top of the tower. There is only a stone bed, a dilapidated table, and a small window that overlooks the entire snow-capped mountain. Although simple, it was not dirty or messy. It even has a strange sense of elegance. "General." The boy's clear voice broke the deathly silence of the cell. Two people sat at that worn-out table. One was an old man with a full head of white hair and a withered appearance, but whose eyes were still as sharp as an eagle's. The other was a boy who was about 11 years old. The boy had dazzling platinum blonde short hair, and his features were so exquisite that they seemed to be a work of art sculpted by God himself. What makes him most unforgettable is his eyes. His left eye was a deep, ocean blue, while his right eye was a brilliant, golden amber color. Heterochromia. Eerie, yet noble. Blake Grindelwald. At this moment, he was holding a black chess piece and gently placing it on the chessboard, completely blocking all of the white piece's escape routes. "You've lost again, grandfather." Blake had a faint smile on his lips, a smile that carried 3 parts nonchalance and 7 parts confidence. Sitting opposite him, Gellert Grindelwald stared blankly at the dead end on the chessboard for a long time. Then, the Dark Lord, who once struck fear into the hearts of the entire European magical world, suddenly burst into a hoarse but hearty laugh. "Ha ha ha ha! Good! What a brilliant strategy of putting oneself in a do-or-die situation to survive. Blake, your heart is crueler than mine. If that hypocritical Albus were here, he would definitely give up the opportunity to attack in order to protect those few useless soldiers. But you are different." Grindelwald's cloudy eyes suddenly shone with an astonishing light as he stared intently at the boy before him. "You are willing to sacrifice everything for victory. This is the true bloodline of our Grindelwald family." Blake shrugged slightly, leaning back in the cold chair with an elegant posture, as if he were attending a noble banquet rather than being in prison. "Grandfather, you flatter me. I just think that since the goal is to win, the losses in the process are just necessary costs." Blake silently added to his mind. "Besides, as a time traveler, if I can't even beat an old man who's been imprisoned for decades, what's the point of living?" That's right. Blake is a time traveler. 11 years after arriving in this world, he went from being an abandoned baby to becoming the only visitor in this tower, and also Grindelwald's only bloodline. Although he didn't understand the biological principles behind it, that didn't stop old Grindelwald from seeing him as his only hope. Just then. Bite. Host detected to be 11 years of age or older, plot point activated. The Ultimate Dark Wizard Training System, cough cough, correction, the Ultimate Wizard System has officially awakened. New player quest issued, attend Hogwarts and generate at least 1000 points of shock value for Dumbledore. Task reward, a new player gift pack. The electronic voice echoing in his mind made Blake's smile widen. System? It's late, but it's here. But what's with the strongest dark wizard training system modification? Are you afraid of being sealed away by the river crab mythical beast? Never mind, none of that matters. The important thing is that his era is finally about to begin. Just as the system voice finished speaking, suddenly, a blinding silver light shone through the window. The barrier, which had been swirling with wind, seemed to sense some familiar magic and automatically parted, creating a crack. A silver-white phoenix guardian glides gracefully in through the wind and snow. It carried a heavy parchment envelope in its mouth and gently placed it on the dusty table. The Hogwarts wax seal on the envelope stood out starkly in the dimly lit cell. Old Grindelwald's laughter abruptly stopped. His gaze fell on the letter, and his expression became incredibly complex. There is nostalgia, pain, mockery, and also a hint of, barely perceptible tenderness. Albus. He stretched out his withered fingers and gently traced the words on the envelope. Even after half a century, those familiar handwritings still made his heart race. He still loves using this fancy handwriting, it's so pretentious. Old Grindelwald chuckled, but his movements were very gentle. Then he looked up at Blake. It seems that place has finally found you. Hogwarts. The safest magic school in the world? Ha, it's just an ivory tower that old man built for himself. Blake picked up the envelope and gently stroked the shield emblem with his fingertips. Grandfather, do you want me to go? Instead of opening it directly, he asked a question. Grindelwald stood up. Despite wearing prison clothes, despite his hunched figure. But at this moment, the domineering aura that once reigned supreme burst forth from this aged body without reservation. The air throughout the entire tower was trembling. Go. Why not go? Grindelwald walked up to Blake and placed his hands on the boy's shoulders. In those heterochromatic eyes burned a wildfire that never went out. Blake, where are you going? You should go and see the education he's so proud of, and see the world he's protected, a world full of the weak and hypocrisy. Then. Grindelwald's voice was deep and hoarse, like the whisper of a demon. Use your talent and your strength to conquer that place. Tell Albus Dumbledore. What we, Grindelwald, have lost, we will take back with our own hands. As he spoke, Grindelwald suddenly reached out and pulled off the necklace that had been hanging around his neck for decades. It was a roughly made pendant, yet it exuded an ancient magic. A triangle with a circle in the middle, and a vertical line running through it. Deathly Hallows. This is the symbol of Grindelwald's life and the totem of his ideals. Take it. Grindelwald placed the pendant around Blake's neck without any hesitation. The cool, metallic touch against his skin allowed Blake to sense the will of the previous Dark Lord contained within it. This is a dream I never realized. Now, it's yours. Blake looked down at the Deathly Hallows symbol on his chest, a hint of amusement flashing in his eyes. He knew what the pendant meant. This is more than just an accessory. This is a call to arms for the saints. As long as he wears this out of Nurmengard, the remnants of the saints lurking in the shadows of the world will go mad for it. Aren't you afraid that Dumbledore will just throw me into Azkaban? Blake asked, half-jokingly. He wouldn't dare. Grindelwald sneered, sat back in the worn-out chair, and began fiddling with the chessboard again. He owes me. I can never repay this debt in this lifetime. Besides. The old man gave Blake a long, thoughtful look. With your talent, if you can't even handle an old man who's about to die, then you don't deserve the name Grindelwald. Blake smiled. His laughter was elegant, yet arrogant. He stood up and gave the forgotten Dark Lord a perfect, impeccable aristocratic bow. As you wish, grandfather. I will go to Hogwarts. But. Blake turned and walked toward the door, waving the acceptance letter in his hand with his back to Grindelwald. I am not going to inherit your hatred. I am going to create my own, new order. After all, the magical world is just too boring right now, isn't it? Boom. As Blake finished speaking, a thunderclap boomed outside the window. The flash of lightning illuminated the boy's back, stretching his shadow long, like a giant dragon about to spread its wings, shrouding the tower and even the whole world in shadow. Hogwarts, Scotland. Principal's office. Dumbledore stared intently at the silverware in front of him. He sensed it just now. The letter was opened. Moreover, the magical contract that represents acceptance of enrollment has already taken effect. He's coming. Dumbledore slumped into his chair, reached for a handful of cockroaches, but couldn't get them into his mouth. An image involuntarily surfaced in his mind. A blond boy with heterochromatic eyes stood on the ruins of Hogwarts, holding the Elder Wand in his hand, with burning blue fiend fire beneath his feet. In the firelight, the boy smiled at him. For the greater good, Principal. Click. The pile of cockroaches in Dumbledore's hand was crushed to pieces. This semester. The old headmaster sighed bitterly, looking out the window at the calm black lake. It looks like things are about to get interesting. It was more than just lively. This is simply. The nightmare begins. Chapter 2. The edge of the Black Forest, where Austria and Germany meet. Fog filled the air, and it was cold and damp. This is the grey area of the magical world, and also the only way to reach Nurmengard. Albus Dumbledore stood under a dead oak tree. He had deliberately changed into a slightly more understated dark blue robe today, but his topped wizard hat was still adorned with moving gold stars that glittered in the mist. It's like Santa Claus accidentally wandering onto a Gothic film set. Call. Dumbledore took out a pocket watch, looked at it, and sighed for the 13th time. As the headmaster of Hogwarts, the task of welcoming new students is usually done by Professor Hagrid or Professor McGonagall. Even Tom Riddle back then only went to the orphanage to intimidate, cough cough, just to give you a hint. But today's freshman is different. He had to come in person. It wasn't just for the safety of Hogwarts, but also to confirm exactly what kind of child that old man had raised. If it's the second Voldemort, then the wizarding world really doesn't need anything else, it should just be destroyed. Just as Dumbledore was lost in thought. Smack! A crisp popping sound rang out. There's no flow powder smoke or the dizziness of a key fob. The mist parted automatically to both sides, as if welcoming a king. A tall, slender figure slowly emerged from the depths of the mist. Blonde hair, heterochromia. He was wearing a well-tailored, handmade black suit with a silver brooch pinned to his lapel. The design of that brooch. Dumbledore's eyelid twitched violently. Although it is not a Deathly Hallows, the design of this thunderbird with outstretched wings is clearly one of Gellert's favorite totems back then. The boy walked very slowly, each step as precise as if measured with a ruler. That elegance and arrogance etched into his very bones is practically a carbon copy of a young Gellert Grindelwald. Even. It's colder and more unpredictable. Good afternoon, Professor Dumbledore. Blake Grindelwald stopped 3 steps away from Dumbledore and bowed slightly. Her etiquette was impeccable. His voice was gentle and warm, like jade. But in those heterochromatic eyes, there was no reverence for the greatest white wizard of our time. There is only one. Watching the playful antics of the former grandfather? Dumbledore was startled by this strange thought and quickly forced a kind smile. Good afternoon, Blake. It's a pleasure to meet you. It seems you received my letter. Certainly. Blake smiled faintly and flicked non-existent dust off his sleeve with his slender fingers. If it weren't for that letter, I think I would be enjoying afternoon tea at a French estate right now, instead of being chilled by the wind in this god-forsaken border region. Dumbledore. This kid has a sharp tongue. That sarcastic tone sounds so familiar. Ahem, Dumbledore cleared his throat awkwardly. Hogwarts will provide you with the best education, you'll have your peers there, and there's surveillance, isn't there? Blake interrupted Dumbledore's spell-casting animation. He raised his head, and his golden right eye seemed to see right through people's hearts. Professor, we are all intelligent people. Let's skip the empty formalities. I am Grindelwald, and you are Dumbledore. Just putting those two surnames together is enough to fill the headlines of the Daily Prophet for a whole year with those idiots in the Ministry of Magic. Blake took a step forward, closing in on Dumbledore. Despite being only 11 years old, her presence was in no way inferior. I went to Hogwarts because I wanted to. Not because you need me to go. Once we understand this, our relationship will be much more pleasant. After saying that, Blake extended his hand, then, lead the way, headmaster. I've heard the ice cream at Diagon Alley is good, I hope it won't disappoint me. Dumbledore stared at the outstretched hand for 2 seconds, stunned. This script is wrong. Shouldn't it be that withdrawn teenagers are reformed, or rebellious teenagers are suppressed? What's with this domineering CEO ordering his driver around vibe? Besides, that kid's hypocritical politeness was practically pointing a finger at him and calling him a hypocrite. The defenses have been breached. The old principal's hardened heart cracked. Gellert, what kind of monster did you raise? Half an hour later. London, Diagon Alley. Compared to the gloomy Flip-Over Alley, Diagon Alley is undoubtedly lively and bustling. The young wizards crowded outside the Quidditch boutique, drooling over the Nimbus 2000, while the witches browsed and selected items in the robe shop. When Blake and Dumbledore appeared, the crowd automatically parted to make way. After all, Dumbledore's appearance was too conspicuous. And Blake's devastatingly handsome face instantly attracted countless eyes. Who's that boy? He's so handsome. Is he a young master from some pure-blooded family? He has such a refined air about him. Even though I'm only 11, I feel like I'm already in love. Listening to the surrounding chatter, Blake remained expressionless, a hint of disdain flashing in his eyes. Noisy, crowded, and disorderly. This is the center of the British magical world. It seems that apart from Fudge's belly getting bigger and bigger, the taste of British wizards has not improved much over the past few decades. Dumbledore pretended not to hear the complaint and pointed to a small, dilapidated shop in front of him. We've arrived at Ollivander's wand shop. If you're looking for a wand that works, this is the only place to go. The only option. Blake looked at the peeling gold lettering on the signboard, a playful smile curving his lips. Never claim to be the only one in this world, Professor. Push the door open and enter. The shop was very small, with nothing but a long bench inside. Thousands of long, narrow cardboard boxes were stacked almost to the ceiling, and the air was filled with dust and the smell of magic. Good afternoon. A soft, goosebump-inducing voice rang out. Garrick Ollivander, the old man with light-colored eyes like 2 big moons, floated out from behind the shelves like a ghost. Albus Dumbledore. It's good to see you again. Let me think, elderberry, 13.5 inches, oh, that's the one you changed to later. Ollivander's gaze lingered on Dumbledore for a moment, as if he wanted to say something, but he quickly looked away. He looked at Blake. Upon seeing this, the old man's face instantly turned pale. As the best staff maker in all of Europe, he had an extremely keen sense of magic. The magical energy emanating from the boy before me. That's insane. It's like a ball of fire compressed inside a beautiful porcelain vase, ready to explode at any moment. And this is Blake, Blake said calmly, Blake Grindelwald. Snap. Ollivander dropped the measuring tape in his hand to the ground. If you shouted Voldemort in the wizarding world in 1991, people would be too scared to speak. But if you shout Grindelwald, those elderly wizards would be so frightened that they would immediately pull out their wands and fight desperately. That was a nightmare for an entire generation. Grindelwald. Ollivander took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the turmoil in his heart. His professional ethics prevented him from running away. Okay, okay. I think I know what to find for you. Since it's that bloodline, let's try this. Dragon's nerve, ebony, 12 inches, hard. Ollivander shakily handed over a wand. Blake had just reached out his hand, his fingertips not yet touching the wand. Squeak! The wand emitted a shrill sound, like a scream, and then... boom! It exploded inside the box. It exploded into a pile of sawdust. Ollivander! Dumbledore! Too weak! Blake withdrew his hand without even frowning. This fragile little stick can't even withstand my overflowing magic. Ollivander wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. An accident, this was an accident. Try this one. Phoenix feathers, Hollywood. This time, the wand didn't explode. Just as Blake's hand was about to touch it, it flew out of the box as if it had seen a ghost, and darted into the gap of the top shelf, trembling. Reject. Extreme resistance. It wasn't because of a mismatch, but because of fear. Everything has a spirit. These wands sensed the domineering will deep within Blake's soul, a will to conquer everything, destroy everything, and reshape everything. They dared not be used by him. I tried more than a dozen in a row. 3 exploded, 5 flew away, and 7 pretended to be dead. The entire wand shop was a mess, as if it had just been hit by a typhoon. Ollivander was completely numb. He'd been making wands for centuries and had never seen anything like it. Is this still a little wizard? This is practically a human-shaped magic nuclear reactor. It seems. Ollivander shook his head bitterly. Mr. Grindelwald, we may not have a wand worthy of yours. Your magic is so unique. Ordinary cane cores and wood cannot bear your will. Dumbledore watched from the side, his expression growing increasingly serious. This magical property. He's even more pure and domineering than Gellert was back then. Without a good wand to guide him, this child could blow up half of Hogwarts at any moment due to a magical outburst. Just then, a pleasant notification sound rang in Blake's mind. Bite. Host detected selecting a wand. A standard wand has been detected as incompatible with the host's supreme magic physique. The new player gift pack has been automatically activated. Congratulations, host, you have obtained Elder Wand, Pseudo, Growth Type Artifact. Description: this is a seed wand cultivated using a branch of the Elder Wand, fused with the power of the system. It possesses all the characteristics of the Elder Wand and can evolve as its host grows. Current level, LV1. Blake's eyes lit up. System, you're very considerate. This is exactly what I've been looking for. He looked at Ollivander, who looked utterly desperate, and Dumbledore, who looked worried, and a slight smile appeared on his lips. Since Mr. Ollivander doesn't have anything suitable here, then I'll have to use my own. As he spoke, Blake slowly reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Your own? Dumbledore was taken aback. Blake, wand making is a precise discipline, it's not something you can just do with any piece of wood. His words caught in his throat before he could finish speaking. Because Blake had already drawn the wand. It was a wand about 15 inches long. The entire body is an ancient and mysterious grayish-brown color, with sections of the staff resembling elderberries. A faint, unsettling glow flowed across the surface of the staff. The moment this magic wand appeared, the air seemed to freeze. An aura of death, coldness, yet supreme power instantly filled the entire small shop. Thump! Ollivander's legs buckled, and he ended up kneeling on the ground. He stared intently at the wand, his eyes practically bulging out of their sockets, his lips trembling as if he were fluffing cotton. This pattern. This aura. Death, this is Death's creation. As a master of making staffs, he was all too familiar with this legendary design. Dumbledore reacted even more strongly than him. The moment I saw that magic wand, Dumbledore instinctively clutched his pocket. Because in his pocket lay an identical wand. The Elder Wand. One of the Deathly Hallows. The legendary invincible magic wand. This is impossible. Dumbledore roared inwardly. The real Elder Wand is right here with me. That was one after he defeated Grindelwald in 1945. But what's that thing in Blake's hand? That aura, that magical resonance, even that feeling that made the cigarette in his pocket restless. This is something that high-quality counterfeits absolutely cannot achieve. Professor Dumbledore. Blake gently waved his wand. Buzz. A visible ripple of magic spread out, and the wand boxes that had been flying around instantly returned to their places, neat and tidy. You look surprised. Blake looked at Dumbledore, whose face was ashen, with a half-smile. This was given to me by my grandfather. He said, this wand, you should find it familiar. What? Do you want to inspect the goods? Provocative. This is blatant face-to-face attack. Dumbledore's breathing quickened. He looked at the 11-year-old boy who was holding a legendary weapon and smiling at him like a little devil. My head is buzzing. This isn't a school trip. This is clearly a death sentence. Gellert. You old BD. What incredible legacy did you leave this child? At this moment, the greatest white wizard of this century broke down. Chapter 3. When Dumbledore left Ollivander's wand shop, his steps were noticeably heavy. His hand would unconsciously reach for his pocket every now and then. The real old man's wand lies there. But for some reason, ever since he saw the high-quality replica system made in Blake's hand, he always felt that his own wand seemed a little inferior. There was even a slight urge to run away from home and seek refuge with a new master. This must be an illusion. Dumbledore took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. Professor, although I know that the elderly are prone to osteoporosis and difficulty walking. But if you keep walking this slowly, Gringotts might be closing time. Ahead came Blake's elegant yet slightly irritating voice. Dumbledore looked up. The blond boy stood in the sunlight, toying with the magic wand that exuded an aura of death, spinning it like a pen. Passers-by quickly moved aside, afraid of being pointed at by the magic wand. They're here, they're here. Dumbledore reluctantly followed. He suddenly realized that he should prepare 2 extra bottles of nitroglycerin pills for this year's Hogwarts opening ceremony. Gringotts Wizarding Bank. This is the most prominent building in Diagon Alley. The snow-white marble building stood tall, looking out of place among the group of crooked and twisted magic shops. Of course, it also exudes the air of a nouveau riche who thinks, I have money, I'm the boss. The two passed through 2 large bronze doors, where goblin guards dressed in scarlet and gold uniforms bowed deeply to Dumbledore. But when their gaze swept over Blake, there was a hint of disdain in their eyes. After all, in the eyes of fairies, apart from the pure-blood patriarchs who possess the keys to ancient vaults, the other young wizards are just penniless paupers who haven't grown up yet. Enter the second silver gate. That famous warning poem is inscribed on the door. Please come in, stranger, but be careful. The fate of the greedy will be bloodshed and despair. Blake read the last sentence softly, then gave a disdainful sneer. It is clearly these greedy demons who are warning others not to be greedy. Isn't that as ridiculous as a vampire trying to persuade someone to be a vegetarian, Professor? Dumbledore's eyelids twitched. Blake, it's best to keep a distance in goblin territory. Humble. Blake raised an eyebrow. No, Professor. The more humble you are with fairies, the more they will think you are easy to bully. Only by smashing galleons in their faces or holding a knife to their throats will they learn what politeness is. As they spoke, the two had already entered the spacious marble hall. About 100 fairies sat behind a long counter, some weighing coins, others examining gems with eyepieces. The clattering sound of the abacus beads was filled with the stench of money. Blake walked straight to a counter in the middle. The fairy behind the counter was engrossed in writing and drawing on a large ledger, without even looking up. Withdraw money or deposit money. The fairy's voice was sharp and grating, with an air of arrogance. If you're exchanging Muggle currency, go to the right and queue up. The exchange rate is 1 to 5, plus a handling fee. He didn't even lift his eyelids. They completely mistook Blake for one of those muggle-born wizards who had never seen the world. I don't exchange currency. Blake's voice was calm to the point of being cold. I've come to pick up something. Key. The fairy impatiently stretched out a withered, chicken claw-like hand. Get out of here if you don't have a key, don't waste my time. Snap. A crisp metallic clang. Blake casually tossed an ancient key, completely black and seemingly carved from a single piece of obsidian, onto the counter. The key glided across the smooth marble countertop and stopped precisely in the fairy's hand. The fairy glanced at it casually. The next second, as if it had been burned, the fairy sprang up from the bar stool. This is... He picked up the key with trembling hands. Unlike other pure-blood families, the handle of the key was not engraved with a complex family crest. Instead, it is engraved with an extremely simple symbol. A triangle. A circle. A vertical line. Deathly Hallows. On the side of the key, a line of very small text is engraved in runes. For the greater good. Clang. The quill pen in the fairy's hand fell into the ink bottle, splashing ink all over his face, but he didn't care at all. His eyes were fixed on the symbol, his pupils contracting violently. It was fear etched into the fairy's genes. 50 years ago. That man who swept across Europe and almost caused Gringotts headquarters to change hands. That demon king who once burned through half of the vaults of a European magic bank with dark magic flames. This is his key. You are. The fairy's voice changed. From her previous arrogance and sharpness, she instantly transformed into extreme fear and funning. His legs went weak, and he walked right out from behind the counter, right in front of all the wizards in the hall. Thump. He knelt down in front of Blake. Your Excellency. I had no idea you would grace us with your presence. This is my dereliction of duty. I deserve to die. I deserve to die. This scene instantly silenced the entire noisy hall. Everyone was stunned. The wizards who were queuing to withdraw money almost had their eyes pop out of their sockets. The fairies of Gringotts? Kneel? When did these guys, who usually look down on everyone, learn to act like this? Dumbledore stood to the side, helplessly covering his forehead. He knew it. As long as this kid shows off the token, it will definitely cause a huge commotion. Get up. Blake looked down at the kneeling fairy with an indifferent gaze. I don't like being watched by people. Take me to the vault. Yes. Yes. Right away. The fairy scrambled to her feet and frantically waved towards the depths of the hall. Bank manager. Quickly call the bank manager out. Open the lowest level S-class passage. We're going to that place. Deep underground in Gringotts. There are no clattering carts like in a typical vault here. Blake and Dumbledore sat in a lavishly decorated custom box, complete with velvet cushions. Even Dumbledore was experiencing this kind of treatment for the first time. Blake. Dumbledore gazed at the stalactites rushing past the window, his tone complex. Gellert, what exactly did he leave you? A vault? Or a mountain of gold? Blake held the exquisite black tea that the fairy had just served him and took a small sip. Professor, you underestimate him. Money is just a useless number to people of his level. What he left me with is profound knowledge and character. As they were talking, the car stopped. This place extends thousands of meters underground, even deeper than the legendary place where the fire dragon was imprisoned. An ancient and dangerous aura permeated the air. Before them stood a massive black stone door without any keyholes. Only the door bears the huge symbol of the Deathly Hallows. Your Excellency! Your Excellency! The president of Gringotts, an old goblin with a beard that dragged on the ground, stood shakily to one side. This vault has not been opened since 1945. Everything inside remains exactly as it was back then. Blake stepped forward. Instead of using a key, he simply reached out and pressed his hand on the sign. The magic within his body surged. Rumble. The heavy stone door creaked and groaned as it slowly opened to the sides. An aura that had been sealed away for half a century wafted over. Dumbledore instinctively raised his wand, preparing to defend himself. But when he saw what was inside the vault, he was completely stunned. There were no mountains of gold coins as I had imagined. There were no dazzling jewels either. Inside this vault, which is as big as a Quidditch pitch, are rows of neat display shelves. On the first shelf were stacks of yellowed parchment. Blake picked up a card at random. A pledge of allegiance signed by the French Minister of Magic in 1942. He picked up another one. Decree for the perpetual transfer of 51% of the shares in Gringotts branch in Germany. Take another one. The Malfoy family mortgaged half of their estate's title deed in search of asylum. Hiss. Even Dumbledore, with his vast experience and knowledge, couldn't help but gasp in shock. This is hardly a vault. This is clearly irrefutable proof of Grindelwald's dominance over half of the European magical world during that era. Any one of these contracts, if taken out, would be enough to cause an earthquake in the current magical world. And on the shelf behind, various black magic items emitting eerie fluctuations were displayed. A dagger forged from dragon bone, a crystal bottle sealing the seed of fiend fire, and even a complete Dementor specimen radiating a chilling aura. Is this the legacy of the saints? Dumbledore felt his head begin to ache. If Blake uses these things to cause trouble. That scene was too beautiful for him to even imagine. It seems that grandfather is quite generous. Blake nodded in satisfaction. He did not touch the contracts or the dark magic items. He doesn't yet have the strength to take over these massive forces and dangerous goods. He understood the principle that the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. He walked straight to the corner where several inconspicuous sacks were piled up. I opened it and took a look. It's all golden galleons. Although it wasn't much, probably only a few 100,000, it was just the least valuable thing in this vault. System, put these gold coins into your storage space first. Ding, 500,000 galleons have been collected. Host's current assets have surged. Blake casually grabbed a handful of gold coins and put them in his pocket, then turned around and smiled at Dumbledore, who looked worried. Don't worry, Professor. Let those contracts and dark magic items stay here for now. After all, I'm just a naive first-year student right now, right? Dumbledore's lips twitched as he looked at Blake's innocent, not really, smile. Simple? If you're so naive, then Voldemort could be considered an outstanding graduate of Hogwarts. When I came out of Gringotts, the setting sun had already painted the streets of Diagon Alley red. The Fairy Bank manager, along with all the senior executives, bowed respectfully and escorted Blake all the way to the front door. That humble attitude made the passing wizards question their existence once again. Oh! Harry, look! Just then, a loud, gruff voice broke the silence. That's Professor Dumbledore. Blake stopped and turned to look. All I could see was at the foot of Gringotts' towering steps. A giant, as large as a small mountain, was carrying a small, thin, black-haired boy wearing tattered glasses. Rupert Hagrid. As well as the boy who miraculously survived, Harry Potter. At this moment, Harry was wearing his cousin Dudley's old clothes, which were so big they looked like sacks. His hair was messy and his face was covered in dust. He looks like a homeless child. And Blake was standing on the steps. He was dressed in a bespoke suit, his posture was upright, and his blonde hair shone brightly in the sunset. Behind him was a group of bowing fairies, and next to him stood the greatest white wizard of the century. He's like a prince straight out of a fairy tale. Their eyes met in mid-air. Harry was stunned. He had never seen such a dazzling person. That confident, composed, and noble demeanor made Harry, who had lived in the storage room since childhood, feel a strong sense of inferiority. Hagrid. Harry tugged at Hagrid's sleeve and asked in a low voice. Who is he? Is he a prince? Hagrid squinted at Blake on the steps. As a half-giant, he has a more acute intuition than ordinary people. He smelled an aura on that blond boy that was more dangerous than the most ferocious beasts in the Forbidden Forest. It was a kind of power that seemed capable of devouring everything. The taste of the abyss. I don't know, Harry. Hagrid shivered and instinctively stepped in front of Harry. But he's definitely a big guy. On the steps. Blake looked at the savior whose face seemed to say, I'm the protagonist, but I'm miserable, and a slight smile appeared on his lips. Is this Harry Potter? That so-called savior? That's interesting. Blake chuckled, turned, and left, leaving behind only a dashing silhouette. System. He silently recited it in his heart. Now that the main characters have appeared, then this play should officially begin. Ding! Important plot character Harry Potter detected. Side quest triggered, the initial shock on the Hogwarts Express. Mission objective, demonstrate your dominance on the train and show the savior who the true king of Hogwarts is. Blake touched the heavy galleons in his pocket, a flash of gold appearing in his eyes. Hogwarts. Are you ready to welcome your new king? Chapter 4. King's Cross Station, September 1st. The whistles of steam locomotives resounded through the sky, and the red Hogwarts Express, puffing out white smoke, resembled a lurking dragon. Platform 9¾ was packed with wizards and parents seeing their children off. It was noisy, crowded, and filled with the smell of sweat mixed with the odor of owl droppings. It was a truly disastrous public transportation experience. Blake Grindelwald stood at the edge of the platform, his brow slightly furrowed, holding a silk handkerchief in his hand and covering his nose in disgust. Unlike the other young wizards, he wasn't struggling to push a mountain of luggage carts behind him. They didn't get all sweaty and knocked around by the owl cage. If that were the case, it would be an insult to the name Grindelwald. Two enormous black dragon-skin chests were floating in mid-air behind him, 3 inches off the ground, as if supported by an unseen hand. On the box, a magnificent black owl perched, its golden eyes arrogantly looking down at its grey-brown kin. This is Blake's pet, named Caesar. Look. That boy. My God, he's using the levitation charm? He's only a first-year student, right? Silent spell casting? That's a technique only for upperclassmen. The young wizards and their parents around them all stared in shock. It's worth noting that before Hogwarts started, most freshmen didn't even know how to hold a wand. And this boy could use the levitation spell as naturally as breathing. This overwhelming aura of genius has led many parents to turn around and start criticizing their own children who can only giggle foolishly. Look at them. And look at you. You can't even catch a toad. Not far away, a chubby little boy with a round face was lying on the ground crying and looking for a toad. Hearing this, he cried even more sadly. Blake ignored the surrounding chatter. He walked with elegant steps, like Moses parting the sea, through the crowd, and boarded the train. At the rear of the train, there was an empty compartment. Blake waved his wand. The floating suitcases automatically flew onto the luggage racks and were arranged neatly. He took a book out of his pocket. Unveiling Cutting-Edge Black Magic. This book is a regular in the restricted section of Hogwarts, but in Nurmengard, it's just Blake's bedtime reading. He leaned against the window, his long legs crossed, and turned the pages of a book. Sunlight shone on his platinum blonde hair, creating a scene as beautiful as an oil painting. Until... click! The door to the private room was rudely pulled open. I told you there were still empty seats here. A drawn-out, somewhat arrogant voice rang out. Immediately afterwards, 3 figures squeezed in. The boy in the lead had a pale, pointed face and his light golden hair was combed until it was shiny. It was Draco Malfoy. Behind him followed 2 burly men who looked like bodyguards, Crabbe and Gore, who were eating cakes they had bought from the food truck, looking rather silly. As soon as Malfoy entered, he saw Blake sitting by the window. He paused for a moment. Both have blonde hair and both possess an aristocratic air. But he had to admit that the person in front of him was far superior in looks and presence. A feeling called jealousy arose in Malfoy's heart. In Slytherin, and even in the pure-blood circle of the entire wizarding world, when has young Master Malfoy ever been outshone by anyone? Hello. Malfoy raised his chin, trying to look down on people. I've got my eye on this box. Go somewhere else. Crabbe and Gore behind him also cracked their fists, making a snapping sound, trying to intimidate him with their size advantage. However, the boy by the window didn't even look up. He didn't even pause turning the pages of the book. Ignore it. Completely ignore it. This attitude is even more infuriating than directly retaliating with insults. Malfoy's face flushed red instantly. Are you deaf? Do you know who I am? My father is Lucius Malfoy, a member of the school board. If you don't want to be expelled before the semester even starts, you'd better get out now. Malfoy practically roared it out. This my dad is Lee Gang, cough cough, my dad is Malfoy. Trick works every time in the pure blood circle. Pity. The person he encountered today was a descendant of a family that even Voldemort had to address as senior. Finally, Blake closed the book. Smack. A soft sound. It stood out exceptionally well in the quiet private room. Blake slowly raised his head. Those heterochromatic eyes, the deep blue of the left eye like the sea, the amber of the right eye like gold, looked at Malfoy without any emotion. There was no anger. There was no disdain. There is only one kind of indifference towards stray dogs barking by the roadside. Are you done talking? Blake's voice was soft and magnetic. But when Malfoy heard this, it sent a chill down his spine for no apparent reason. You. Malfoy opened his mouth, about to utter a harsh word. Boom. A terrifying, suffocating mental pressure erupted from Blake without warning. This is no ordinary burst of magic. This is the kingly aura personally trained by the Dark Lord Grindelwald on the Tower of Nurmengard. In Malfoy's view, the boy in front of me seemed to vanish in an instant. Instead, a giant dragon awakens from the abyss, ready to devour its prey. That fear from the depths of his soul caused his mind to go completely blank. Malfoy. Blake stood up and took a step forward. Clatter. The sound of leather shoes on the floor felt like it was pounding on Malfoy's heart. If your father Lucius were here, he might be qualified to sit with me and have a cup of tea. As for you. Blake leaned forward slightly, his gaze sweeping across Malfoy's pale face like a blade. A brat who hasn't been weaned yet, a bully trying to intimidate others. Who gave you the courage to yell at me like that? Fish Liang. Although Malfoy didn't understand who Fish Liang was, he did understand the phrase little brat. You. Malfoy wanted to argue and reached for his wand. But to his horror, he discovered that his hands were trembling. No. My whole body was shaking. The instinctive fear of being targeted by a top predator rendered him completely immobile. Cold sweat streamed down his forehead, instantly soaking his back. Crabbe and Gore behind him were in even worse shape. These two big guys who only knew how to eat were now shaking, and the cake had fallen to the ground. Roll. Blake uttered a single word lightly. There was no shouting or yelling. But that one word struck the three of them like a heavy hammer blow. Yes, yes. Malfoy's lips trembled, and almost instinctively he turned and ran. Because his legs were weak, he tripped at the door and almost fell flat on his face, looking as pathetic as a stray dog. Crabbe and Gore scrambled out after them. In the blink of an eye, the area outside the private room became quiet. They ran away already. Tisk. Blake sat back down, picked up his book, and shook his head with some boredom. Is this the future of Slytherin? The glory of pure bloods? If Salazar Slytherin saw this, he'd probably be turning in his grave. Bite. Side quest completion update, a show of force, 1/3. The host has successfully intimidated Draco Malfoy with his aura, gaining plus 200 shock points. The current psychological trauma experienced by Malfoy is equivalent to the size of a 3-bedroom, 1-living-room apartment. Hearing the system's prompt, Blake's lips curled up slightly. Good. This is just the beginning. Just then. Knock knock knock. The door to the private room was knocked on again. This time, however, the knocking sounded hesitant and polite. Immediately afterwards, the door was pushed open a crack. A little girl with thick brown curly hair, slightly large front teeth, and several heavy textbooks in her arms peeked in. Hermione Granger. At this moment, her face showed a mixture of anxiety and the arrogance of a top student. "Excuse me, may I interrupt? Have you seen a toad? It belongs to Neville, he lost it." Hermione's voice stopped abruptly before she could finish speaking. Because she could see the scene inside the private room. There was no messy luggage, and no noisy boys. Under the sunlight, a young man, dressed in an elegant suit and even more handsome than a magazine star, is quietly reading a book. That profile. Hermione felt her heart skip a beat. Wow, so handsome. Even though she's only 11 years old and will become a know-it-all in the future, she's still a sucker for good looks. And Hermione's sharp eyes fell on the book in Blake's hand. Unveiling cutting-edge black magic. The black cover features a strange and mysterious skull pattern, exuding a dangerous charm. Hermione wasn't scared at all, instead, her eyes lit up. That's the taste of knowledge. Sorry, I didn't see a toad. Blake turned his head, closed the book, and gave the little witch who was staring blankly at the door a standard gentleman's smile. However, if you're looking for a quiet place to read, there are empty seats here. That smile. Like a spring breeze on your face, like ice and snow melting away. Hermione's face flushed red instantly. She felt a little dizzy. What an amazing classmate. That poise. That good looks. That taste in books. Compared to that red-haired Ron with a face covered in soot and who could only grin like an idiot, it's like the difference between a prince and a beggar. Thank you. Hermione, somewhat flustered, straightened her skirt and went into the private room. My name is Hermione Granger. What book are you reading? Is that an older textbook? I don't think I've ever seen it at Flourish and Blots. Blake chuckled inwardly as he watched the little witch transform into a curious child. In the original story, Hermione was too showy and assertive in the early stages, which resulted in her having few friends. But in reality, she just craved the approval of her peers. As long as you can outsmart her and impress her with your looks, this proud little lion will then turn into the most affectionate little kitten. This book. Blake waved the black magic book in his hand, his tone casual. It's nothing, just some extracurricular reading. A little trick about how to use black magic, to shut up some disobedient people. Hermione. It sounds a bit scary. But he's so cool. Chapter 5. The Hogwarts Express travels smoothly through the Scottish countryside. The scenery outside the car window rushed past, changing from golden wheat fields to rolling green hills. The atmosphere inside the private room was somewhat subtle. Hermione Granger sat opposite Blake. At this time, the little witch, though only 11 years old, was already showing signs of the competitive spirit and desire to perform that are characteristic of a top student. She looked at the blond boy across from her who was quietly reading a book. The other person is too perfect. Its perfection put her under unprecedented pressure. To cover up this nervousness, and to prove that he wasn't just a bookworm who only knew how to find toads. Hermione took a deep breath, straightened her back, and activated machine gun mode. I've also read some books. I've memorized Miranda Goshawk's standard spells, beginner. I've also tried a few simple spells, and they all worked quite well. Although there are no wizards in my family, my parents are very supportive. I've already read Hogwarts, a history 3 times. Hermione sounded like she was giving a rushed interview presentation. She desperately wanted to build up a little bit of confidence in front of this boy who looked like a young nobleman. After all, the book The Dark Arts revealed that Blake was holding earlier was really a blow to his morale. Oh! Blake finally looked up from between the pages of the book. His heterochromatic eyes, with a hint of languor and a touch of amusement, fell upon Hermione. You memorized it all? Yes. Hermione proudly raised her chin, like a little peacock spreading its tail feathers. I know every syllable of the spell and every swing of the wand by heart. For example, the levitation spell, the book says it requires a wave and a shake, with the emphasis on the ad. Stop! Blake extended a long, slender finger and gently pressed it to his lips, interrupting Hermione's recitation. Miss Granger. If what you call learning magic is just memorizing that dogmatic, tattered book like reciting legal statutes, then I regret to inform you. You are wasting your time. Hermione's smile froze. It felt like being doused with a bucket of cold water from head to toe. Her eyes widened instantly, even flashing with a hint of anger. A tattered book. That's the textbook designated by Hogwarts. It's a work by the master Miranda Goshawk. How could you say that? Do you think you know more than the textbook? For a good student who regards books as truth, Blake's words were nothing short of blasphemy. This is Hermione Granger. Before she was truly won over, she was a stubborn, even somewhat aggressive little lion. Blake wasn't angry. He even found the ruffled little lion quite amusing. Textbook. Blake chuckled and closed the book of dark magic in his hand. Textbooks are written for mediocre people. It's so that even those clueless idiots can safely and like assembly line workers perform clumsy tricks. Do you think I'm talking nonsense? Blake pulled the Elder Wand pseudo from his pocket. He didn't even stand up, he just leaned back lazily in his chair. Then let's do an experiment, Miss Granger. You just mentioned the levitation charm, right? Hermione bit her lip, defiantly pulling out her grapevine wand. Let's do it. You got him, Leviosa. She waved her wand with textbook precision, her wrist flicking and snapping with every movement. As the incantation was recited, a feather that had just fallen from Caesar, which was placed on the small table, floated up, swaying precariously. Although it was somewhat unstable, it was about a few inches off the ground. Look! I did it! Hermione looked at Blake triumphantly. The method described in the book is absolutely correct. Blake looked at the trembling feather and shook his head helplessly. His eyes were filled with a sigh of this child is beyond redemption. Too slow. It's too complicated. And it's too ugly. The 3 evaluations were like 3 knives stabbing Hermione's heart. You! Hermione exclaimed, her face turning red with anger. Watch closely, Miss Granger. What is true magic? Blake did not recite a lengthy spell like Hermione. There was no comical waving or shaking. He simply raised his wand and casually tapped the feather. He didn't even move his lips. Silent spell casting. The next second. Boom. There were no exaggerated sound and light effects. But Hermione felt as if the air around her had frozen. The feather, which had been swaying, suddenly seemed to come alive. It is no longer floating passively. Instead, it soared into the sky like a real bird. It rapidly circled in the narrow compartment, drawing graceful arcs, and could even perform difficult maneuvers such as diving and rolling. Even guided by Blake's wand, the feather began to transform. It hardens and becomes sharper. Finally, it transformed into a small silver throwing knife, which slammed into the wooden frame of the private room door. Penetrating. It's still buzzing. Dead silence. Absolute silence. Hermione's mouth gaped open, wide enough to fit an egg. Her eyes were fixed on the feather nailed to the door, then she glanced at Blake, who looked completely nonchalant. Worldview. It collapsed. Is this still the levitation spell? No need to chant incantations? No need to swing the cane? It can even turn feathers into throwing knives. This is on a completely different level from what she learned in that book, Standard Spells. If Blake used magic, then what did she just use? Trick? Or is it a monkey show? This is impossible. Hermione's voice trembled, her pride and confidence were shattered in that instant. Why can you do it without chanting spells? The book clearly says that mispronouncing even a single syllable can cause an explosion. Blake put away his wand and sat up straight again. Looking at the devastated little witch, he decided to give her a slap followed by a sweet treat. The spell is only to guide your immature magic. The gestures are simply to bring your scattered mind together. A true wizard uses intention rather than technique. Blake pointed to his temple, his tone carrying a hint of Grindelwald's seductive charm. When you want it to fly, your will must be absolutely firm. You have to tell the world that it must fly, instead of praying for magic to make it fly. This is what is meant by thought is more powerful than words. Certainly. Blake shrugged. That old hag Miranda Gosark wouldn't dare put these things in the textbooks. Because the Ministry of Magic needs obedient tools, not powerful spellcasters. Boom. Hermione felt as if a thunderbolt had exploded in her mind. These remarks. That's absolutely outrageous. That's heresy. But, looking at the feather-throwing knife that was still trembling on the door frame, Hermione had to admit it. He's right. This is what magic should be like. Powerful, free, and unrestrained. In comparison, all those rules and regulations I had memorized before were simply a joke. I was wrong. Hermione lowered her head, her eyes slightly red. As an extremely intelligent and highly competitive academic achiever, the sense of defeat was devastating when she discovered that the knowledge she was so proud of was worthless in the eyes of others. But then, an even stronger desire welled up from the bottom of her heart. That is a yearning for the truth. A yearning for true power. Hermione looked up abruptly, her brown eyes burning with an unprecedented light. She looked at Blake like a believer looking at a god. Blake, classmate. Can you teach me? I want to learn this magic. I'm not afraid of difficulties. I can memorize more books. I can do more practice. Looking at Hermione, who instantly transformed from a proud little peacock into a fervent little fangirl, Blake smiled with satisfaction. A female academic genius nurtured through training? This seems more interesting than simply showing off. You want to learn? Blake leaned forward slightly, his heterochromatic eyes fixed on Hermione, his voice deep and captivating. That's not easy. Forget those stupid textbooks and rebuild your magical logic. And you have to pay tuition to be my student. Hermione nervously clutched the hem of her dress. How much? I have pounds, I can exchange them. No, talking about money is too vulgar. Blake extended a finger and shook it gently. The tuition fee is. Help me with those boring assignments at Hogwarts. I don't like wasting time on those meaningless papers. Hermione paused for a moment. Help me with my homework? Is this the tuition fee? No problem. The little witch nodded without hesitation, her eyes resolute. I'm best at writing papers. I can write even on a 100-inch screen. Bite. Congratulations, host. You have successfully subdued Hermione Granger, the Lady of Destiny. Hermione's affection level has increased to adoration, 60/100. Reward, photographic memory, passive skill. Reward, Hermione's homework writing service, permanent. Blake was in high spirits upon hearing the system's reward. Not only did he gain a top student as a junior, but he also solved his homework problems for the next 7 years. This is a huge profit. The rest of the journey became exceptionally harmonious. Hermione no longer flaunted her knowledge to everyone like in the original story. Instead, she behaved like a well-behaved schoolchild, holding a notebook that Blake casually tossed to her and studying it with great eagerness. When she encountered something she didn't understand, she would ask questions cautiously. Blake was in a good mood and occasionally offered a few pointers. Often, just one sentence from him would make Hermione suddenly realize something, and she would look at him with even more admiration. Time flies. As darkness fell, the train began to slow down. The train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train, and we will take it to the school for you. An announcement came over the loudspeaker. The train came to a complete stop. The corridor instantly became noisy and crowded, with the young wizards pushing and shoving their way out. Let's go, my clerk. Blake stood up and straightened his perfectly wrinkle-free suit. Hermione blushed and followed closely behind him like a dutiful little follower. As the two stepped out of the private room, they ran into Harry and Ron, who were coming out of the next room. At this moment, Ron was looking at the large grey rat in his hand with a gloomy expression. Ban tried to bite Gower's finger, but ended up scaring herself so much she fainted. How embarrassing! Harry, on the other hand, was being pushed along by the crowd, looking completely bewildered. When they saw Blake, they all stopped in their tracks. No way! The art styles are so different. Among the new students around me, some had their robes askew, some had snack crumbs all over their faces, and some were still looking for their pets. Only Blake. He wore a sharp black suit with a finely crafted long robe over it, his blonde hair was perfectly styled, and his expression was calm and composed. Behind him, Hermione stood tall and proud, her face beaming with the arrogance of "I'm the boss's woman." The two were walking in the crowd. It was just like a king and queen inspecting their territory, cough cough, with a lady-in-waiting. That guy, he has such a strong presence. Harry couldn't help but whisper. Ron curled his lip sourly, "TCH, he's obviously an arrogant Slytherin, just like Malfoy." But Ron glanced furtively at Hermione behind Blake and shrank back. That girl looks really fierce. She glared at me in the hallway just now, and I felt like Professor McGonagall was watching me. Hogwarts platform. The wind was biting cold. A dim oil lamp swayed in mid-air. First-year students. This way. Harry. Come this way. How are you? Hagrid's massive body was like a lighthouse, shouting and yelling. Come on, follow me. Are there any more first-year students? Watch your step. We're going to cross the lake. Blake stood in the cold wind, looking at the muddy path and the dark, chilly lake in the distance. His eyebrows furrowed involuntarily, forming a deep frown. A traditional lake crossing ceremony. Sitting on one of those dilapidated little boats that haven't been washed for hundreds of years, covered in moss and smelling of fish. 4 people have to squeeze together. The obsessive-compulsive Grindelwald said. This is absolutely unacceptable. System, is there any way for me to get there without taking a boat? Ding. Host requirements detected. Recommended skill, water walking, magic absorption technique. Would you like to spend 100 shock points to redeem this? Change. Blake did not hesitate. Isn't the shock value just for showing off? If not now, when? Then. As all the new students cautiously climbed onto those rickety little boats, Hagrid was preparing to take a head count. Hey? Where's that blonde kid? Hagrid held up his oil lamp and looked around. The next second, a gasp of surprise erupted from the crowd. Good heavens! Look at the lake! Who is that? What is he doing? Hagrid and all the new students turned around abruptly. All that could be seen was the pitch-black black lake. A tall, slender figure did not board the ship. That's just how he is. Step by step, they stepped onto the water. The lake water beneath his feet didn't submerge his shoes, instead, the moment he stepped on it, it rippled with a magical, pale blue light, as if supporting his body. As if walking on flat ground. Walk on water. Blake strolled leisurely across the moonlit lake, his hands behind his back. The long robe behind him fluttered in the wind. Taking a boat is too slow. I'll be waiting for you at the castle gate. The boy's voice carried on the wind, clearly penetrating everyone's ears. Hagrid nearly dropped the oil lamp in fright. Harry and Ron's jaws hit the gunwale. Hermione sat on the boat, watching that departing figure, her eyes practically overflowing with tears. I knew it. He really is a god. That night. They hadn't even entered the gates of Hogwarts yet. Blake Grindelwald's name was destined to be etched into the nightmares of this year's freshmen. Chapter 6. Above the Black Lake. The night was as dark as ink, and a thick fog filled the air. This was supposed to be a mysterious ritual that filled the new students with awe and even some fear. In accordance with Hogwarts' thousand-year tradition, the young wizards should be huddled in their swaying little wooden boats, enduring the cold lake water while worrying that a tentacle might suddenly reach out from underwater and drag them down. But today, the art style has suddenly changed. All eyes were not on the majestic castle, and on that figure walking on the water. Blake strolled leisurely with his hands in his pockets. The leather shoes on my feet felt like I was walking on the most expensive marble floor as they touched the water. With each step, a pale blue magical halo rippled outwards. That's a high-intensity magical adsorption technique. It is the ultimate expression of precisely controlling magic to every inch of the sole of your foot. My God, is that something a human can do? My dad says only powerful adult wizards can walk on water. He's so handsome. Really? The new students on the small boat had long forgotten the cold, and they were all as excited as if they were watching a circus performance. Harry Potter was leaning over the gunwale, his glasses fogged up with water. Hagrid, are all the students at Hogwarts this amazing? Hagrid was rowing with all his might when he heard this, and the muscles on his big face twitched violently. No. Harry. I served as a caretaker at Hogwarts for 50 years. This is absolutely, the first one. Just then. Whoosh! The calm lake surface suddenly exploded. A huge, slimy tentacle suddenly emerged from the water beside Blake. That's a giant squid from the Black Lake. It seemed curious about this tiny creature that dared to stroll on its head and wanted to extend its tentacles to say hello. The girls on the boat screamed. Watch out! Hermione shouted instinctively. However, Blake didn't even stop walking. He merely tilted his head slightly, his heterochromatic pupils one blue and one gold giving a cold glance at the enormous tentacle. There was no panic in his eyes. There was only a feeling of displeasure at having my walk interrupted. Buzz! A powerful pressure emanating from the depths of his bloodline, the violent aura of the Dark Lord Grindelwald, instantly pierced through his gaze into the water. The next second, the giant squid that had been so aggressive just moments before suddenly seemed to have been electrocuted. Whoosh! The tentacles retracted frantically, and the enormous body desperately sank underwater, creating a whirlpool. They got away. This monster that reigned supreme over the Black Lake was scared away by a single glance. A boring mollusk. Blake looked away and straightened his tie. It's not your fault that you're ugly, but it's wrong of you to go out and scare people. When the small boat finally reached the shore, the freshman, soaked to the bone, shakily climbed onto the cobblestone ground. Blake was already standing on the shore, without a single drop of water on him. He even took the time to use a levitation spell to clean the dust off his shoes. Grace. Timeless. Knock knock knock. Hagrid raised his massive fist and pounded on the castle's oak doors. The gate was wide open. Professor Minerva McGonagall, dressed in a bright green robe and with a serious expression, stood behind the door. Her gaze swept over a group of trembling freshmen, and finally, the image was frozen on Blake, who was clean, neat, and even seemed to be glowing. This. Professor McGonagall was stunned. Every year, which new student isn't covered in mud and utterly disheveled? This kid looks like he just walked out of a fashion show. Hagrid, what's going on? Hagrid scratched his messy hair, his tone complicated. Professor, this child, he walked over. Leave? From where? From the lake surface. Professor McGonagall. She took a deep breath, adjusted her glasses, and gave Blake a long look. At that moment, she finally understood why Dumbledore was so nervous. This child. It really is a monster. All right, welcome to Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall forced herself to focus and began reciting the same old opening remarks. Regarding the college, regarding bonus points and deductions, regarding honor. Blake was getting a little bored. He was observing the castle. Ancient and magnificent, but also filled with an air of decay and decay. Now that I'm here. This place probably needs some renovations. Blake silently considered whether he should turn Slytherin's cellar into a sea view room with floor-to-ceiling windows. Finally, the door opened. The new students lined up and entered the magnificent auditorium. Thousands of candles floating in mid-air illuminated the entire auditorium. The 4 long tables were filled with students. On the ceiling, the night sky, under a spell, shone brightly with starlight. This place is enchanted, it looks like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, A History of the School. Hermione whispered some scientific information to Blake behind her, her tone carrying a hint of expectation for praise. Blake looked up. A magical version of holographic projection technology. The resolution is okay, but the brightness is a bit too bright. If it were me, I would add a nebula filter to make it more atmospheric. Hermione. Although I don't understand what resolution and filters are. But it looks really high-end. As expected of Blake. At that moment, Professor McGonagall brought over a 4-cornered stool. On top of it was a tattered, patched-up pointed wizard's hat. Sorting cap. Suddenly, a crack appeared in the hat, and it began to sing an extremely awful song. Nonsense like maybe you belong to Gryffindor or maybe you belong to Slytherin. Blake resisted the urge to sew the mouth of the tattered hat shut with a silencing spell. It's noisy. Is this Hogwarts aesthetic? This is a disaster. When the song ended, the entire audience erupted in applause. Professor McGonagall stepped forward with a roll of parchment in her hand. When I call out someone's name, that person should put on a hat and sit on a stool. Hannah Abbott. A little girl with rosy cheeks and 2 golden braids stumbled up to them. Hufflepuff. Hermione Granger. Hermione took a deep breath and ran up. She silently vowed to herself, I want to go to the best college, I want to prove myself. The hat just touched her head. Gryffindor. Hermione breathed a sigh of relief and took off her hat, but before walking toward the long table, she subconsciously glanced back at Blake. There was a hint of reluctance in his eyes. She actually, really wanted to be in the same college as Blake. Draco Malfoy. Malfoy swaggered up, and before his hat even touched his head, he shouted, Slytherin. He walked toward the long table amidst cheers, and as he passed Blake, he instinctively shrank back, not daring to meet his gaze. Harry Potter. The moment the name was uttered, the entire room fell silent, then erupted into a murmur. Everyone wanted to see what the savior looked like. The hat lingered on Harry's head for a long time. Finally, he shouted, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted in the loudest cheers, and the Weasley twins shouted, We have Potter! We have Potter! Blake yawned listlessly. He knew these plot points by heart. Finally, when only a few freshmen remain. Professor McGonagall looked at the name on the parchment. Her hand suddenly trembled uncontrollably. That name. It's like some kind of magic, or a curse. The stern vice principal was so stunned that he seemed to have something stuck in his throat, pausing for a full 3 seconds. The entire auditorium sensed something was amiss and gradually quieted down. Everyone was looking at Professor McGonagall. Dumbledore sat in the center of the teacher's table, his deep blue eyes now devoid of any smile. He leaned forward, his hands crossed and resting on his chin. He stared intently at the blond boy at the end of the line. They've arrived. It's finally here. Professor McGonagall took a deep breath, her voice was a little hoarse, but it still carried clearly to every corner of the auditorium. Blake. Grindelwald. Boom. If the name Harry Potter is exciting, so the name Grindelwald is a nuclear bomb. That's a spell to stop time. The entire auditorium fell into a deathly silence in an instant. You could hear a pin drop. Most of the young wizards looked blank, they had only seen the name in the corner of history books and did not understand what it meant. But those senior students from pure-blood families, the ghosts who lived through that dark age, as well as all the professors sitting in the faculty section. In that instant, everything changed color. Clang! Professor Quirrell dropped his wine glass onto the table without realizing it, and a sharp burning sensation came from the back of his head. That's Voldemort's anger. His fear. Snape's usually indifferent face was now tense, and his black pupils contracted sharply. Professor Flitwick slid down from the tall stack of books and exclaimed in surprise. And Dumbledore? He closed his eyes, seemingly unable to bear looking at the boy who came out. Grindelwald? Is that Grindelwald? My God! A descendant of the first Dark Lord. Why is he at Hogwarts? Shouldn't he be at Durmstrang? Dumbledore actually allowed him to enroll. The pure-blooded wizards began to tremble. In the bedtime stories they had heard since childhood, Grindelwald was a being even more terrifying than Voldemort. Because Voldemort only carried out terrorist activities in Britain. And Grindelwald, he almost turned the whole world upside down. In this deathly silence that everyone was watching, Blake moved. He showed no sign of nervousness, in fact, he even wore his signature elegant yet arrogant smile. He stepped out of the line. The leather shoes made a crisp sound as they stepped on the floor. Day, day, day. Every step felt like stepping on everyone's nerves. He walked to the four-cornered stool but did not sit down immediately. Instead, he turned and nodded slightly to Dumbledore in the teacher's seat. Good evening, Principal. The tone was like that of an old friend reuniting. Dumbledore opened his eyes, his expression extremely complex. Good evening, Blake. Blake chuckled softly, lifted the hem of his robe, and gracefully sat down. Then, he stretched out his long, slender fingers and picked up the tattered sorting hat. So dirty. Is this the hygiene standard at Hogwarts? He made a disdainful remark before reluctantly putting the hat on his perfectly platinum short hair. The next second, the hat had just touched my hair. A terrifying will, powerful enough to freeze a soul, surged into the sorting hat's brain, if it had one, in an instant. That was an endless blue flame. That was the arrogance of standing atop a tall tower, looking down upon all living beings as insignificant as ants. That was an ambition to completely shatter and rebuild the entire magical world's order. The scream of the sorting hat didn't echo in Blake's mind. It shouted directly from the mouth. The sound was extremely shrill, like a duck being choked. Merlin's beard. What the hell is that? Put me down. Put me down now. What's in your head? Is that hell? It's terrifying. It's enormous. You want to rule the world? No. You want to reshape the world. The sorting hat writhed wildly on Blake's head, trying to escape its terrifying host. It has divided up tens of thousands of students. Even Voldemort back then was just dark and cruel. But this one? This is pure domineering. It's the ultimate desire to conquer. Shut up! Blake coldly rebuked in his mind. If you dare to yell again and mess up my hair, I wouldn't mind burning you to ashes with fiend fire and then giving Dumbledore a new hat. Threatenin'. A blatant threat. The Sorting Hat froze instantly. It could sense that the boy wasn't joking. He really is going to burn it. No. Don't burn me. The Sorting Hat trembled, its tone instantly becoming incredibly obsequious and hurried. It didn't even dare to do any further analysis, nor did it dare to utter any nonsense like "you have both courage and wisdom." It just wants to get rid of this giant Buddha statue as soon as possible. Go there. Only there can contain your ambition. If you don't want the school to be demolished. With all its might, the Sorting Hat shouted out the destined name to the entire audience. Slytherin. And it is. King of Slytherin. The last suffix was added subconsciously after the hat was terrified. The entire venue fell silent once again. The students at the Slytherin table watched the boy remove his hat and rise gracefully. No one dared to applaud. Malfoy even buried his head in the plate. Because they don't feel the joy of welcoming new classmates. Rather, it is a kind of the fear of welcoming the Demon King's arrival. Blake casually tossed his hat back onto the stool and tidied his hair. His gaze swept across the room, finally settling on the Slytherin table. A wicked smile curved his lips. So. Please take care of me in the days to come. My subjects. Chapter 7. Inside the auditorium, candlelight flickered. What should have been the most boisterous opening banquet of the semester became so quiet you could hear a pin drop because of the arrival of one person. Blake Grindelwald. The boy, who had just been hailed as the King of Slytherin by the Sorting Hat, was walking unhurriedly toward the long table belonging to the silver-green Slytherin house. Every step he took seemed to land on the heartbeat of everyone present. The atmosphere at the Slytherin table was somewhat eerie at this moment. According to Hogwarts' unspoken rules, the seating arrangement at the long table is strictly regulated. The end closest to the faculty seating area, the so-called chief position, usually belongs to the most powerful and influential person in that college. Normally, the people sitting here are the 7th grade male student council presidents or prefects. And sitting there today is Gemma Farley, the 5th-year prefect of Slytherin. The female prefect, who came from a pure-blood family, straightened her back, trying to maintain her dignity as a prefect. But the moment she saw Blake approaching, her face paled uncontrollably. That look. That's terrifying. Although Blake was still smiling, his heterochromatic eyes seemed to reflect not the crowd in front of him, but rather a group of ants looking down upon him. Blake walked to the very front of the long table. That position belongs to the chief. Gemma Farley sat there stiffly, thinking of getting up to offer her seat, but feeling that it would be too embarrassing for the prefect. If she didn't offer her seat, she felt that she was about to be in big trouble. Just when she was so conflicted that she felt like she was suffocating, Blake stopped in his tracks. He stood before Prefect Farley without saying a word. He merely lowered his gaze slightly, and his golden right eye glanced at her indifferently. Just one glance. Boom. Prefect Farley felt as if he were in a cold, deep sea. The surrounding air was sucked out, and the oxygen in the lungs was burning. That tremor, originating from the depths of my soul, was screaming wildly. Get out of the way. Get out of the way now. Or you'll die. That. Prefect Farley suddenly stood up, his movement so forceful that he even overturned the gold goblet in front of him. Clang. The sound of the wine glass rolling down was particularly jarring in the silent auditorium. This spot has better lighting. Please, have a seat. She stammered out this excuse that even she didn't believe, and then, as if fleeing a disaster, quickly grabbed her plate and ran to the middle of the long table. They didn't even dare to turn their heads. The entire audience erupted in uproar. At the Gryffindor table, Ron's mouth dropped open, Merlin's tattered stocking. That's a Slytherin prefect. And she actually gave up her seat for a first year. Hermione's eyes lit up as she gripped her fork. Is this the aura of a king? Even the prefects have to give way. So cool. Meanwhile, on Slytherin's side, all the little snakes lowered their heads, and no one dared to express any opinion on the scene. Slytherin's creed is simple. The strong are respected. Although Blake hadn't yet displayed his magical abilities, his sheer presence enough to scare the prefects into giving up their seats and the Sorting Hat's King of Slytherin were enough to shut them up. Blake looked at the vacant chief seat and nodded in satisfaction. He reached out and flicked non-existent dust off the back of the chair, then lifted his robe and gracefully sat down. His movements were fluid and graceful, as if he was born to sit in that position of dominance. Very good. Blake glanced around the long table at the various gazes that were filled with fear, curiosity, or envy. He took out a clean white silk napkin from his pocket and gently placed it on his lap. Since I'm sitting here, I don't think anyone will object, right? His voice wasn't loud, but it was gentle and clear, reaching every corner of the long table. Be opposed to? Are you kidding me? Even the prefect has run away, who dares to object? Look at those senior pure-blood wizards, they all wish they could bury their faces in pumpkin juice, afraid of being called out by this descendant of the Dark Lord. This is called. After I finish speaking, who agrees and who disagrees? No one objected. Blake's lips curled slightly as he tapped his fingers lightly on the table. Serve the food. As he finished speaking, it seemed as if even the house elves of Hogwarts were following his instructions. Bang! The long table was instantly filled with a dazzling array of delicious food on the golden plates. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops, lamb chops, sausages, steak, boiled potatoes, roasted potatoes, French fries. The aroma is wonderful. Blake picked up his knife and fork and began to enjoy his first dinner at Hogwarts. His dining etiquette was impeccable. The movements of cutting the steak were precise and elegant, and there was not a sound when chewing, not even a drop of sauce on the lips. And within 3 meters of him. This created a strange vacuum zone. No one dared to sit next to him. Even those who wanted to get closer to her were kept at bay by that invisible keep-away aura. Except for one person. Draco Malfoy. The young master of the Malfoy family was sitting 4 body lengths away from Blake. He was struggling internally. On the one hand, he was so terrified of Blake on the train that he wet himself, and now seeing Blake makes his legs twitch. On the other hand, as a Slytherin who had been instilled with the idea of befriending the strong since childhood, he also saw this as an opportunity. If I could become Grindelwald's sidekick, wouldn't that mean you could do whatever you want in Slytherin? Then, Malfoy took a deep breath, holding a glass of pumpkin juice, and mustered all his courage to shift his position slightly closer to Blake. Mr. Grindelwald. Malfoy's voice trembled slightly, and he wore a fawning smile. I am Draco Malfoy. We met on the train. I think that's a misunderstanding. My father often talks about your grandfather, saying he was a true great man. As Malfoy spoke, he observed Blake's expression. However, Blake is cutting a tender and juicy lamb chop. The cutlery struck the porcelain plate, producing a soft, pleasant sound. He didn't even lift his eyelids. It was as if the person sitting there wasn't the eldest son of the Malfoy family, but a wisp of air. Or perhaps, a buzzing fly. They were ignored. Complete disregard. This kind of disregard is even more painful than being publicly humiliated. Because it means you don't even deserve to look me in the eye. Malfoy's smile froze on his face, his hand holding the cup hovering in mid-air, unsure whether to put it down or hold it up. It was so embarrassing that you could dig a 3-bedroom apartment out of the ground with your toes. A few low snickers came from the surrounding area. Those were the sarcastic remarks from other students who had also been bullied by Malfoy. Malfoy's face turned a deep shade of liver, and he could only slink back to his seat, gulping down pumpkin juice to hide his embarrassment. Bite. The host ignored Malfoy's advances, achieving the achievement, cold and aloof male god. Malfoy's favorability, -10, due to love turning to hate, fear level, +50. Reward, aura +5, making you even more intimidating to look at. Blake chuckled inwardly. Mock up. You can't even handle this? There are certain requirements to being my dog. You are not qualified yet. The dinner was drawing to a close. The food on the plate disappeared, leaving it clean and pristine again. The teachers' seats are in the very center. Albus Dumbledore stood up. As he stood up, the previously noisy auditorium gradually quieted down. Everyone looked at this greatest white wizard of the century. Except for Blake. He was holding a wine glass, which he had secretly replaced with red wine, gently swirling it and admiring the curve of the wine clinging to the side of the glass. Welcome. Dumbledore opened his arms, a signature benevolent smile on his face, but his eyes seemed to drift towards the head seat at the Slytherin table. Welcome everyone to Hogwarts for the start of the new school year. Before the banquet concludes, I would like to say a few words. Idiot. Crybaby. Trash. Twist. Thank you everyone. The audience erupted in applause. Although most people didn't understand what these 4 words meant, since they were spoken by Dumbledore, they must have a profound meaning. Only Blake. He did not clap amidst the applause. He remained seated, leaning back slightly in a languid posture. The moment Dumbledore sat down, Blake raised the wine glass in his hand. They were separated by most of the auditorium. There were 4 long tables between them. He offered a respectful salute to the old man from afar. A playful, profound smile curled at the corners of his lips. That look seemed to say, "Long time no see, old man. You acted very well." Dumbledore's body stiffened slightly as he sat down. He saw the boy raising his glass. That action. That expression. It was just like 50 years ago, on that snowy night, when that man raised his glass to him. For the greater good, Albus. At that moment, Dumbledore seemed to be hallucinating. The old headmaster's hand trembled slightly, almost knocking over the golden goblet in front of him. He smiled bitterly to himself. This isn't a school trip. They're clearly here to collect a debt. Now, before everyone goes to bed, let's sing the school song together. Dumbledore shouted, trying to dispel the gloom in his heart. He flicked his wand, and a long golden ribbon floated out, twisting like a snake above the dining table to form lines of text. Each person chooses their favorite tune. Ready, sing. Then, a disaster has begun. The entire school's teachers and students began to wail and scream. The Weasley twins used the tune of Funeral March. Hermione used a cheerful nursery rhyme tune. The Slytherins, on the other hand, used a lifeless tone. The various sounds mingled together, even more piercing than the screams of the Mandrake. Blake put down his glass and covered his ears. System, can I use fiery blaze to burn this place down? Host, please calm down. Burning down the school will directly lead to expulsion, which will hinder your future attempts to show off. Tisk. Blake sighed. The Grindelwald family's aesthetic sense has been severely insulted. Finally, after the song ended, Dumbledore wiped away tears of emotion, or perhaps tears from being moved by the awful music, from his eyes. Music is far more captivating than anything we do here. Now it's time to sleep. Everyone, go back to your dorms. The Slytherin first-year students followed their prefect, Gemma Farley, through the noisy crowd toward the basement. Along the way, Prefect Farley walked very fast, seemingly trying to establish his leadership position. But she soon discovered. No matter how fast she walks. The blond boy followed at a leisurely pace at the very front of the group, just a step behind her. And because Blake's aura is too powerful. This caused all the new students to be afraid to surpass him and could only follow behind him. From a distance, it was as if Blake was leading a group of underlings on a tour of his territory. She, as the prefect, was more like a servant guiding the way. Prefect Farley was devastated. I can't live like this anymore. Slytherin Common Room. The cellar located at the bottom of Black Lake. Upon entering, one is greeted by a cold and damp atmosphere. The walls and ceiling were made of rough stone, and round green light bulbs were hung from the ceiling by chains. A roaring fire burned in an exquisitely carved fireplace, but it did little to dispel the bone-chilling cold. Of course, the most eye-catching feature is the huge floor-to-ceiling window. Outside the window, the lake water was dark and deep. Occasionally, a giant octopus tentacle or a ferocious mermaid swims by, casting a terrifying shadow. This is our lounge. Prefect Farley stood before the fireplace, trying to regain his composure, and shouted. Glory, ambition, and cunning, these are the tenets of Slytherin. The password is changed every 2 weeks, and the new password will be posted on the bulletin board. Students from other colleges are not allowed to come in. She kept going on and on about the rules. But most of the new students' attention was focused on Blake. Blake walked to the huge floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the giant squid swimming outside. The scenery is beautiful. He commented casually, it's just that the decor is too oppressive. Like a tomb. Prefect Farley. That was designed by Salazar Slytherin himself. And you call it a tomb? Okay, the boys' dormitory is on the left, and the girls' dormitory is on the right. Your luggage has been delivered to your room. Prefect Farley just wanted to end this awkward situation as quickly as possible. Blake turned around and walked towards the corridor of the boys' dormitory. He pushed open a door engraved with silver snake patterns. A 4-person dormitory room. 4 beds with 4 curtain posts, draped with green velvet curtains. At this point, there were already 3 people in the room. Draco Malfoy. Vincent Crabbe. Gregory Gore. These 3 unlucky guys who were kicked off the train by Blake ended up sharing a dorm room with him. What a small world. The moment Blake pushed the door open and came in, Malfoy, who was sitting on the bed and loudly boasting about his family's glory, suddenly stopped talking. It's like a rooster being choked. He looked at the blond boy who walked in with horror. His face turned deathly pale instantly. You. Malfoy pointed at Blake, his hand trembling. How did you get here? Blake closed the door. The click of the lock clicking shut was particularly clear in the quiet dormitory. He turned around, leaning against the door, a look appearing on his face. The kind smile that Malfoy would never forget. What a coincidence, young Master Malfoy. It looks like we'll get along very well for the next 7 years. As Blake spoke, he casually pulled out the Elder Wand. On the tip of the staff, a pale blue flame suddenly ignited. Although it is only the size of a fingernail. But in that instant, the temperature in the entire dormitory plummeted. That wasn't an ordinary flame. That is a raging fire that can burn even the soul to ashes. Now. Blake looked at the 3 trembling figures, his voice as soft as a devil's whisper. Let's set some rules for this dorm room. Who agrees? Who objects? Malfoy stared at the flickering blue flame, sensing its destructive aura. With a whoosh. I cried. Chapter 8. Slytherin's Cellars, the boys' dormitory. Located at the bottom of Black Lake, this place should have been cold, damp, and even somewhat oppressive. But at this moment, the temperature in the dormitory had mysteriously dropped to freezing point, as if even the air itself had been frozen. In stark contrast, at the tip of the Elder Wand, a merrily leaping, pale blue flame danced. Fierce fire. The most violent and uncontrollable destructive fire in black magic. But at this moment, it was like a docile little pet, entwining and circling around Blake's fingertips. It did not emit any heat. On the contrary, it exudes a chill that penetrates straight to the soul. Gulp. A sound of swallowing saliva rang out in the deathly silent dormitory. The one who made the sound was Vincent Crabbe. The burly boy, who looked like a large rock, was huddled in the corner, his legs trembling, and there was a faint wet patch on his crotch. Beside him, Gore was rolling his eyes, about to faint. Draco Malfoy is sitting on the bed. This noble pure-blooded young master was gripping the blanket tightly, his knuckles white from the force. His eyes reflected that faint blue flame. Fear. Despair. There's also a lingering sense of disorientation at the collapse of one's worldview. What do you want to do? Malfoy's voice trembled violently, choked with sobs. This is Hogwarts. School rules strictly forbid the use of such dangerous magic in the dormitories. Danger. Blake raised an eyebrow, his golden right eye appearing particularly eerie in the firelight. He gently blew a breath. Call. The raging fire, which was originally only the size of a fingernail, suddenly expanded rapidly. In an instant, it transformed into a small fire snake as thick as an arm. It let out a silent screech and flew away in a flash. Ah! Malfoy let out a pig-like scream and desperately shrank into the corner of the bed. But the fire serpent did not burn him. Instead, it nimbly wrapped around his neck, like a blue scarf, and gently tightened. Sizzle sizzle. Malfoy could sense it. The flame was only 0.01 centimeters away from his skin. The icy, burning sensation made the hairs on his neck stand on end. As long as Blake has a thought, that flame could instantly burn his head to ashes, leaving not even a trace. Is this what you call dangerous? Blake slowly walked to his bedside and turned his suitcase back to its original state. In our family, this is just a little trick to light cigarettes. Or a cleaning agent used to remove trash. Blake turned around, looked at Malfoy who was almost suffocating, and a mocking smile appeared on his lips. Young Master Malfoy, you seem to have said something just now. Are you going to set rules for me? Come on, tell me about it. I want to know, what kind of rule could be greater than death? Malfoy is going crazy. He felt his soul being slowly devoured by that fiery serpent. Rule? Screw the rules. In the face of absolute power, rules are nothing but bullshit. No. No rules. Malfoy shouted in a sob, his face covered in tears and snot, looking nothing like a noble young master. You're the boss. What you say goes. Take it away. Please. I'm dying. I'm going to tell Dad. Hearing the word Dad, Blake's smile deepened. Lucius. He snapped his fingers. Snap. The fire serpent wrapped around Malfoy's neck vanished instantly, turning into specks of blue starlight that returned to Blake's wand. Cough cough cough. Cough cough cough. Malfoy clutched his neck, coughing violently and gasping for fresh air. It's like a dead fish that's just been pulled ashore. Malfoy, remember this. Blake sat on his bed, which was covered with dark green silk sheets, and crossed his legs. You can tell your dad. He could even bring the Aurors from the Ministry of Magic to arrest me. But you need to think this through. It's been a long time since any new guests have moved into the Tower of Nurmengard. I wouldn't mind adding a few more people to that place. Threatenin'. This is threatening the lives of your entire family. Malfoy froze. Although he was a spoiled young master, he wasn't stupid. He knew the weight of the surname Grindelwald. That's a being that even Voldemort had to be wary of. If we really anger this madman, his father, Lucius, might actually be stuffed into a coffin and sent to Austria. I won't do it again. Malfoy was completely scared. He huddled under the covers like a plucked quail, not daring to even glance at Blake. In another corner of the dormitory, there is also a bed. There sat a dark-skinned, handsome boy. Breast Zabanai. From the moment Blake entered until now, he has remained silent, simply observing everything quietly. Compared to Malfoy's stupidity and Crabbe's incompetence, Zabanai is clearly much smarter. He saw it very clearly. This newcomer, Grindelwald, is someone they can't afford to mess with at their level. That control over dark magic, that aura that treats human life as worthless. This doesn't look like a first-year student at all. This is clearly a miniature version of the Dark Lord. At that moment, he saw Blake's gaze sweep over him. Zabanai wisely stood up and bowed slightly to Blake. Mr. Grindelwald, your abilities are truly impressive. I think Slytherin really needs a true leader. I'm Breast Zabanai, and I'm happy to be your roommate. That's what makes a smart person. If you can't beat them, join them. Or at least, the kneeling posture should be standard. Blake looked at Zabanai and nodded slightly. You are a smart man, Zabanai. Smart people usually live longer. After saying that, Blake clapped his hands. Since everyone has reached a consensus, now, I will promulgate the Grindelwald Code for room 306. Everyone perked up their ears. Even Malfoy, who was still trembling, stopped sobbing. Blake held up one finger. First, I don't like noise. Keep it absolutely quiet when I'm sleeping, reading, or daydreaming. If anyone dares to shout like that just now. A small flame appeared on Blake's fingertip. I'll burn his vocal cords and do a free removal surgery. Crabbe and Gore desperately covered their mouths, afraid that their breathing would be too loud. Second, health. I don't want to see any socks lying around, unwashed underwear, or leftover snack wrappers in this room. If you have them, eat them. Malfoy glanced at the mess of clothes under his bed, his face turned pale, and silently kicked them deep under the bed. Third. Blake stood up and walked over to Malfoy. Looking down at him. Put away your ridiculous pure bloodline theory. In my eyes, there are only two kinds of people. Useful and useless. Even if someone is pure-blooded, they are still trash. A genius is a genius even if he or she is muggle-born. If I hear you all discussing those pointless racial discriminations in this room, I will show you what true bloodline suppression is. After saying that, Blake turned around and waved his wand. Completely cleaned up. A powerful whirlwind swept through, clearing away the dust and odors left behind by previous students in the dormitory. Even the air was filled with a faint scent of pine. Lights out now. I'm going to sleep. Blake took off his coat, hung it on the hanger, changed into his silk pajamas, and got into bed. Smack! With his snap of his fingers, the lights in the dormitory went out instantly. Only a faint glow remained in the fireplace. A deathly silence. Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, and even Zabanai. The four of them didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They climbed onto the bed quietly, even more quietly than a cat. That night, it was destined to be a sleepless night for the new Slytherin students. Malfoy, hiding under the covers, shakily took out the parchment and quill pen by the faint glow of his wand. He is writing a letter. To his father, Lucius. Dear Dad. Hogwarts is terrifying. There's a devil here. A madman. He's treating fiend fire like a toy. He's even going to pack me up and send me to Nurmengard. I want to transfer schools. I want to go to Dumstrang. Or even if Amani. Help me. Wah-ah-ah. At this time, as the instigator of all this, Blake wasn't actually asleep. His eyes were closed, but his consciousness had already sunk deep into the depths of his mind. There lies a vast and boundless starry sky. Bite. Congratulations, host. You have successfully established your dominance in the Slytherin dormitory. Malfoy's fear level is full. Zabinai's submission level plus 30. Reward, Dark Magic Affinity plus 10. The host has been detected to be in a safe environment with ample time. The core function of the Ultimate Wizard System Hall of Heroes has been activated. Do you wish to immediately enter the Hall of Heroes and draw your first personal mentor? Blake's consciousness hovered in the starry sky, looking at the enormous palace that radiated golden light. Valhalla. This is the system's biggest advantage for him. Here, he can summon the spirit projections of great wizards from history, whether they have passed away or were at their peak. Make them your personal trainers. Not only can you learn their magic, but you can also inherit their combat experience and even their special talents. Is that even a question? Of course, enter immediately. Blake smiled slightly and stepped through the golden door. Boom! Radiant with light. When vision became clear again, Blake found himself standing in a huge square, resembling the ancient Roman Colosseum. The surrounding area is filled with towering stone pillars. And in the center of the square, there stood a figure with his back to him. The person was wearing a dark trench coat, and their golden curly hair was dancing wildly in the wind. Even if it's just a glimpse of her back. That arrogant, unruly, and domineering aura, as if it wanted to trample the whole world under its feet, still hits you hard. Blake was stunned. That back view, it looks so familiar. That was the back view he had been watching in Nurmengard for 11 years. Only that one was old and hunched over. And what's in front of me? They're young. That's the pinnacle. He was the one who made all of Europe tremble before 1945, the first Dark Lord. Bite. Guaranteed golden legendary item on your first draw. Congratulations, host. You have successfully summoned your mentor. Gellert Grindelwald, young peak version, LV.max. The figure slowly turned around. A breathtakingly handsome face, yet with a hint of wickedness, appeared before Blake. That was Grindelwald in his youth. That man who could charm all living beings, and whom Dumbledore still can't forget to this day. Young Grindelwald looked at Blake. A flicker of surprise flashed in those heterochromatic eyes, which then turned into fervent joy. Oh! I never expected that what would wake me up would be my grandson. Grindelwald burst into laughter, which echoed throughout Valhalla. Good. Very good. It seems that even that old codger isn't completely senile, and knows to place his hopes on you. Well then, Blake. The young Grindelwald suddenly drew his wand. A burst of blue flames exploded behind him, transforming into a massive fire dragon that roared deafeningly at Blake. Welcome to Hellish Intensive Training. Tonight's first lesson, how to make your enemy kneel down with just your eyes. Blake looked at the sea of fire that filled the sky, but he was not afraid at all. Instead, he was so excited that he trembled all over. He licked his lips and drew his wand. I couldn't ask for more. Grandfather. Chapter 9. Valhalla. This is a magnificent palace that exists independently of time and space. Above us is a dazzling starry sky, and below us lies the ancient obsidian square. And in the center of the square, the dazzling golden light gradually faded away. A figure emerges from it. He was wearing a dark black double-breasted trench coat with the collar turned up, and underneath was a crisp white shirt with the collar casually open. Her unruly, light blonde short hair shone like a burning flame under the starlight. That face! Handsome, charming, and unrestrained. Especially those heterochromatic eyes, the left eye as pale as frost, the right eye as deep as an abyss. No action is required. Just by standing there, a suffocating charm and sense of oppression swept over you like a tsunami. This is Before 1945, the monarch who made the entire European magical world